ABC Nightly News, Wednesday, March 2nd.
Each of us owes it to democracy.
Did you pay $1,000 an acre for this cut over swampy land?
Cut off before, Carmichael. I don't know exactly how many acres were in the fairways that had the timber on it that needed pushing over.
Dr. McWhirter appeared before the State Board of Education and admitted a number of violations of board policy. The board authorizes Dr. Wayne Teague to officially reprimand Dr. McWhirter for the wrong decisions that were made. The board authorizes Dr. Teague to see that all funds are placed in the proper accounts to comply with state auditing procedures. Inasmuch as private funds have been raised to complete the golf course project, the board hereby authorizes Dr. Teague to direct Dr. McWhirter to expend these private funds in lieu of any state monies previously expended in the project. The board authorizes Dr. Wayne Teague to monitor Dr. McWhirter and the, LBW Junior College to see that the board policies which were not followed in the past are followed in the future. The board is convinced there was no effort on Dr. McWhirter's part to make personal gain, and the board is convinced he did not receive any personal gain from this project.
Today's crowded all-day hearing had been promoted as being critical to the future of the waterway, and Alabama, along with other southern states, was in full force, trying to ensure the future of the 10-time project. The biggest promoter for Alabama was the Waterway Authority chairman, Governor George Wallace. Wallace has been optimistic about the waterway, contending that stopping the partially completed project would be a disastrous decision. The governor and other promoters of the waterway cite factors such as industries that have already invested millions in the South because of the project, and the enormous economic impact it should have on the South, some $7 billion worth by the year 2000, with Alabama taking the biggest share. Some $666 million have been invested in this link to the 16,000-mile inland waterway system, and Wallace told officials that, in his opinion, halting the project would be an unwise move.
One who has always thought and felt that the government in many instances gave money away, built waterways in faraway lands in which there was actually no use, many countries in which there were enemies of ours turned out to be in the final analysis, that we ought to build this project here because it will, of course, ensure extra strength for the United States in turbulent times when the free world ought to be stronger, and that in itself ought to be a consideration. I'm sure it will be a consideration, and I appreciate very much you listening to my testimony, and I want to thank you again for your cooperation and the cooperation of the Corps of Engineers by having this hearing. Thank you very much.
Representatives of the Army Corps of Engineers who held today's hearing will report to the President sometime before April 15th with their recommendations. Some have called the Tennessee-Tombigbee Waterway the biggest economic milestone since the Louisiana Purchase. Others have called it the biggest boondoggle since the Manhattan Purchase. As of now, no one knows quite sure what side the government's on, but most are sure they'll find out soon. From Columbus, Mississippi, Bill Weaver, WSFA TV News. shot 9 holes on our golf course.
Colonel, can you relate to us the message that you received and how you dispersed it to the local officials?
Yes, Norman, I can. This morning we received a message from Secretary Reed, which announced that the Craig, Webb, and Kinchlow Air Force bases would be closed. Of course, you're concerned about Craig Air Force Base, and so am I, naturally. And in his message, he states the reasons for the closure of Craig. Naturally, to modernize our forces, etc., we need to save money. And this is part of the reason why Craig is being closed. And in his message, he also states that Craig will continue to train the pilots that they have on board at the present time, and eventually, probably in about a 6 or 8 month period, we would phase down and go to a caretaker operation.
So we did all of this stuff. We proved our point, and yet Secretary Reed, who hanged on, and he's no longer the Secretary of the Air Force, but he's the one that made the announcement, and he was determined to make the announcement. So all we did was useless, and they didn't give us a fair day in court. So what we want to know now is when can we get the base back so we can go to industry. We've been at a disadvantage with this uncertainty, not knowing. We couldn't go to industry and say possibly we're going to have a military base. Now we need to know definite times. Oh, we can fill that place up with industry out there. It's going to take some hard work. And the industrial dollar certainly will need more than the military dollar. For instance, $50 million expenses at Craig. If we got $25 million in industrial payroll, that would equal the military payroll, because 100% would be spent locally. But the uncertainty they've kept us in, and yet they're talking about saving $75 million in cutting these 3 bases, one in Texas, Craig, and Illinois, and cutting out some of these dam projects in the West where they've got a drought, and then they'll probably turn around and give North Vietnam $3 billion to make friends with them again. So if that's economy, they're a bunch of jerks up in Washington. Yeah, that's my argument. I'm not arguing the point of Craig anymore there, because we've been told too many things. Now, it's going to be just as hard to get an answer out of them when they're going to close it. Okay.
Well, I personally think it's going to help Selma. It probably not right now. It'll probably take a year, but if we get industry in here, I think it'll be one of the best things that ever happened to Selma.
Okay.
Well, I can't say that I'm really surprised. It's been going on for so long, but I think Selma will recover. We've had a lot of things happen, and we've overcome in the past, and we'll make it through this too.
Okay.
I would like to see it stay open.
What kind of impact do you think it'll have on the people who work out there and who will no longer have jobs?
I think those that don't have jobs, if it's still open, they would have somewhere to work and have a job.
Okay.
And it'll be good benefit to Selma, like it always has been.
All right. What is your opinion of the announcement today that Craig Air Base is closing?
Well, I really hate that it's closing, because as of right now, Selma's looking real bad.
I mean, you know, like in other words, you can say anything. You know, you can say a whole bunch of things. You know, but
An obituary for Craig Air Force Base would possibly read like this. Craig was born 37 years ago on a cotton field in this spot. 30,000 combat pilots were trained here for 3 wars. Thousands of people fed their families, clothed them, and paid for shelter through civilian jobs on this base. And thousands of businessmen in this area partially kept their doors open because of the payroll here at Craig. And today, a lot of people are in shock on the announcement of the death of Craig. This is Norman Lumpkin, WSFA TV News, Craig Air Base, Dallas County. Police say students who were in class at the time of the abduction say the victim was walking down this street when a man in a blue car drove up and forced her into his vehicle and drove away.
report in 2 sections, one a 233-page report and another 25 pages long, was released by the governor's office after official word was received from Washington. Governor Wallace made no comment when the report was released at around 3 o'clock this afternoon. His press secretary, Billy Joe Camp, said the governor would be available for comment at a later date. Camp said official word came from the office of the president this morning when he overruled the Army's decision not to release the report.
So the authority to release the report came from the White House at 10:45 this morning.
What took them so long? You first said 2 or 3 days. That was a hold up.
Well, actually, you'd have to direct that question to them. That is the information that we received last weekend, last Saturday, I believe it was, and all we know was it was a day-to-day proposition from there on. This morning, the authority to release came.
The Army Inspector General's report states that Charles Rollo, as Adjutant General of the Alabama National Guard, grossly abused the public trust and confidence for his own financial gain. The report has already led to Rollo's resignation and disciplinary action against several officials. Rollo, Colonel Marvin Spigner, and Major Arthur Hathorne were criticized for double dipping, claiming federal pay for jobs they were required to do under their state job descriptions. The report showed that federal vouchers submitted by the men showed they had not performed some of the duties they had claimed they had performed. The extra money was obtained under the Guard's recruitment and retention program. The report criticized the Army for not having controls to discover and prevent abuses. The report recommended that Hathorne, who has been suspended without pay for indefinite periods by Adjutant General Henry Gray, should have federal recognition withdrawn for professional dereliction. The report says Hathorne violated conflict of interest regulations in connection with a novelty company he partially owned. Irregular and irresponsible procedures were routinely followed in processing recruiting and retention payrolls for the Alabama Army National Guard. The report recommended appropriate disciplinary action against Major General Charles Rollo for failure to properly supervise and control the effective administration of the Guard's recruiting and retention program. That he condoned irregular recruiting and fiscal practices, and there was a lack of proper judgment in the personnel use of recruiting resources. The report noted that Alabama, with its exceptionally successful programs, became the guiding star for Army National Guard recruiters nationwide. In Alabama, when it needed something, it was generally approved. This philosophy, the report states, coupled with inadequate and inept management, helped perpetuate a favorable climate for the greening of the Alabama National Guard, or more correctly, the pockets of certain of its key officials. A decision on releasing the report was expected earlier this week. Numerous officials in the state have called for making the report public. It will take some time before the entire 258-page report is fully digested. This is George Mitchell, WSFA TV News, the state capitol.
Oh, weather, of course, is a great contributor. Anytime the negative ions get flying around in air, which they do preceding a storm and all, the birds become very active, very vocal. Many of the animals do. They get extremely active. They go through some aggressive type things, only the aggression is not at each other. It's like jumping in the air instead of jumping on someone. They do this, they warn us quite often that, you know, we're going to have a drastic change in the weather. And some of your large animals do this when, you know, here we're not bothered with our blizzards much, not much snow. But in the higher countries, they predict your snowstorms better sometimes than your good, radar.
If you had to pick out any particular animal here at the zoo that is the best weather predictor, which one would you say would be that one?
Well, here in Montgomery, actually the best weather predictor really is the llama. They're basically from very extreme altitudes. And down here where you have the change of weather coming in, they announce it for us pretty regular.
How do they do that?
Oh, by snorting, and a llama has a very arrogant look about them anyway. They raise that head up very high, a very arrogant look about them, and they get to snorting and jumping up in the air, just actually jumping straight up in the air, all 4 feet off the ground. They kick, snort, begin to run. They don't chase each other particularly. They act like they're running from a storm or looking for shelter, and yet a llama really won't go to shelter.
And then all of a sudden the weather changes drastically.
That's right, and you can almost predict it, that we're going to have a drastic change. And it's usually a violent type change. It comes in, the wind and the rain hits all at once. You don't get too much warning on it. And when this happens, we begin to look particularly at some of the displays like our birds might be in that has, a bar or cage type display with a solid roof on it, which is metal very often, and you get an updraft under that and it'll tear the top off of, which happens occasionally, and then we have to chase birds.
He still has room for improvement.
Did you notice a carryover effect from the big win over UCLA in the Liberty Bowl?
No, I sure haven't. I noticed some carryover offensively. First place, we have our down the middle people back when we had Jones at center and both quarterbacks back and Davis at fullback. And our offensive linemen know what they're trying to do. They've been there, although we lost some, they've been there, and they know more what they're trying to do, and they've been doing much better. As a matter of fact, we scrimmaged yesterday, the first scrimmage we've had, full scale scrimmage, and the offense scored, the first offense scored every time we had the ball, only had one penalty, a 5-yarder, and that's unusual because normally when your first time, the defense will be lined up wrong, be throwing you for losses and things, and it wasn't a good sign defensively because they've manhandled the defense.
Why is there a Special Olympics?
Well, Special Olympics does something for children that have been told all their lives they can do nothing. They've been kept in the back rooms, and suddenly here's a program that children can do and perform in. And so the Special Olympics pattern after the World Olympics provides this outlet which improves the children, gives them the confidence, the self-esteem to normalize the children. This is in essence what we're trying to do. This program has started 7 years ago with 3,000 youngsters in Alabama. We had 3 districts. Today we have 13 districts and 20,000 throughout the state.
Let's go, Burn! Come on, Burn. Come on, boy. Come on. Come on, boy. Come on. Come on, Burn. Come on, boy.
We studied a variety of law enforcement and private polygraph examiners, and there is a wide range. There are some very excellent examiners, and there are some who need considerably more training than they've had.
What can be done to tighten up the regulation in the field?
Well, I think good state licensing laws is a first step to make sure that the requirements are high enough so that you get people who are trained, and then there should be procedures for monitoring it, enforcement procedures for making sure that examiners do perform according to standards, and this can be done at the state level.
What is the situation here in Alabama? Are you aware that there is proper licensing procedures and regulation of people being qualified?
To my knowledge, there is a licensing law in Alabama. I don't know the details of it. The people I know that work in that area that are on the licensing board are quite capable people, so that's all I really know.
Is there a part of the country where a person who may not be qualified to determine the accuracy of a test are allowed to operate?
Oh, yes. The majority of states do not even have a licensing law. In most states, anybody can call himself a polygraph examiner and run tests.
There might be someone who was not quite as skilled who might overlook some evidence of deception or misinterpret something that was really evidence of truthfulness, where a more highly skilled person would not make that mistake.
In your opinion, as an expert in this field, what is the most serious area that should be corrected?
So far as the polygraph field is concerned, I guess maybe the most serious error is the popular misunderstanding of what the polygraph examination is really all about, and then popular support, the public support, for increased standards and for strict enforcement of licensing legislation.
You know, here in Montgomery, we have done very, very fine things in the past 3 years. There has been a zoological society organized. This group of benevolent, dedicated friends have provided facilities here for the citizens of the greater area without taxing their already overburdened tax-paying friend and neighbor. They're providing these of their own initiative. They go out and raise funds and provide them for the citizens. This has been a tremendous asset to the city of Montgomery. Very dedicated people there. And if you look around the zoo, you'll probably see as healthy animals as any zoo has. The zoo is probably as clean as any zoo in the country. And all of this, really, we have not added any man hours to us. We haven't got any more personnel. The guys would just work harder. And, you know, the greater Montgomery area, and certainly the leaders of the city of Montgomery, should pay just tribute to these legions of people that have worked so hard, so dedicated. It's a very, very fine group, and I certainly am going to miss them.
Let's back up a minute. I can't really put this. What? The machine there, the machine is there to tell this man, because of his training, whether or not you're trying to be deceptive or not. So,
When I volunteered to take the polygraph test, I knew that I would pass the test because I intended to tell the truth and had nothing to hide. I subjected myself to unlimited questions concerning any issue in the Whitehurst matter. I did tell the truth, but the polygraph operator reported that he felt that I was attempting deception on some questions. A polygraph rests a person's emotions, and I was and am emotional on many matters that concern this case. I feel that my emotions should not have been interpreted as attempting deception. In order to clear the record and make the truth known through the most reliable method known, I have undergone extensive questioning while under the influence of sodium amytal, sometimes called the truth serum. This test was administered by Dr. Morris Mann, an outstanding physician in the field of general psychiatry. The results of the test given by Dr. Mann contradict those of the polygraph test and verify my innocence of any wrongdoing in the Whitehurst case. I hope that this will help clear the air as to my involvement in the Whitehurst matter. I have taken this test freely and voluntarily. It was my own idea and at my own expense. I know me long enough to know that principle means a lot to me, and otherwise I would have just written it off and accepted it. I'm not being critical of anybody.
Aren't you trained to administer polygraph?
Yes.
So in other words, Colonel Ed Wright, public safety director for this city, went to California to take the polygraph knowing full well the inner workings of the machine, the whole bit. You knew what you were doing.
You're absolutely right. And I'm no fool. I hope I'm not.
Doctors tell us it's the best known method to arrive at the truth.
Well, I'm not sure just what we're talking about here, Clark.
The Senate convened at 12:01 this morning and shortly thereafter ended its filibuster against the proposed $5.5 million appropriation for the University of South Alabama. It was agreed at that time, before the recess, that the measure would come up for a vote possibly on Thursday. When the Senate reconvened at 11 o'clock this morning, it got bogged down in another filibuster, this time over a bill raising the interest rates on small loans.
And that doesn't matter.
Understand that after the issuance of one worthless check, a person cannot be indicted.
The lawmakers are preparing to do battle over the question of whether to allow corporations to contribute to political campaigns as proposed by the state Democratic Party. The New Corrupt Practices Act sets limits on contributions and expenditures in political campaigns and requires reporting those contributions prior to the elections. George Mitchell, WSFA TV News, the state legislature.
This is NBC Nightly News, Wednesday, March 2nd, with John Chancellor and David Brinkley reporting from the NBC News Center in New York.
Good evening. The Social Security law, written in the 30s, reflects the thinking of that day, that a wife was...
Everything has a price tag.
You kidding? The street smells them, but the whole place smells of money.
Where everything's for sale, including love.
He used your job, your body. I know what Jay is. I know what drives him. And I love him.
One day you and I are going to be all alone, and you are going to beg me for it.
Premiering 1 week from tonight at 9, 8 Central and Mountain.
Monday night, see the world premiere of Night Terror.
Officer, I'm almost on empty. We're gonna get some gas.
Night Terror, a mile-a-minute story of a woman fleeing for her life down a lonely highway with no turnoffs.
Someone is trying to kill me, Kim.
It's Valerie Harper of Rhoda as you've never seen her before. Night Terror, Monday at 9:30, 8:30 Central and Mountain, right after the powerful dramatic special, Emily, Emily, on NBC.
Grizzly Adams, the man who became a legend. Grizzly Adams, the man who moved into the wilderness and